in the previous module, we examined a number of Bootstrap components that were purely based around CSS. So by applying the CSS classes for these components, we were able to create them on our web page. In this module, we're going to examine more of Bootstrap's JavaScript-based components. So summarizing, as we saw in the previous module, Bootstrap supports a number of CSS classes that can be applied to your HTML markup in your web pages to activate and make use of these CSS classes. So you could see how the CSS classes modified the generic HTML tags and provided Bootstrap's own way of presenting this same information. So the components that are purely based upon CSS can easily be activated by applying the Bootstrap CSS classes to the various HTML tags that are there in your web pages. And Bootstrap by itself can be used purely for its CSS classes. One other aspect of Bootstrap's CSS classes that we saw was that most of these components started with a base class that you applied. Like, for example, when you look at button, you saw that the base class was the BTN class. Then you would apply something like a BTN primary, which would add the color to the BTN. Then you could define the size of the button by saying BTN SM. And then you could also define the button to be an entire block by using the BTN block class. So all these subsequent classes are modifiers to the base BTN class. So this approach, you will see it over and over again in many of the Bootstrap's components. So you will have a base class, then say a set of modifier classes that can be applied to modify the behavior of the base component. This facilitates easy design of your web page. Taking another example, we can look at the nav class. We use the nav class in the nav bar that we included in our web page in the previous module. The nav class, we modified that by applying the nav bar nav class to that. So that provided us with a certain way of presenting the navigation information. In this module, we'll examine nav tabs and nav pills, which are yet another way of presenting navigation information for your web page. The tabs and the pills way of presenting navigation, again, supported with a JavaScript plugin, provides an enhanced way of providing navigation within your content. So we will examine that in this particular module. I use this as an example to illustrate to you how, starting from a base class, you can modify by applying the modifier classes to that base class. Of course, if you want to bring in the JavaScript part of your Bootstrap components into action, then you should start applying the JavaScript classes. So Bootstrap supports a number of components that are supported through JavaScript plugins. Now, when you use these plugins in your web page, you could include individual plugins that you are actually going to use in your website, or the entire set of plugins. Now, what we're going to do in the exercises is include the entire set of plugins because we just want to explore all of them. But if you are designing a website, you may include only a subset of these plugins that you are actually employing in your website, thereby reducing the amount of JavaScript code that needs to be sent over to a user that is viewing your web page. This is the way I look at Bootstrap's approach to using JavaScript in its own support for Bootstrap components that are enabled with JavaScript. If you look at JavaScript on its own, it provides a lot of flexibility and enables you to do a lot of interesting things. But that also entails writing JavaScript code to be used when you're designing your website. Now, I look at JavaScript as a big sumo wrestler with a lot of capability, a lot of power, but untamed. Now, jQuery as a library that is built on top of JavaScript essentially takes the sumo wrestler and then packages it in a better manner to make this 100-pound gorilla into a more manageable size, more easier to approach, and more easier to include and make use of in your website design. So if you are using jQuery library directly, you can definitely leverage many of the jQuery components and make use of them in your web page. Now, that is an approach that you can always take because jQuery is already going to be included in your Bootstrap web page if you are going to leverage the JavaScript-based components. Bootstrap takes this one step further. And then, looking at the picture, Bootstrap's approach is to take the sumo wrestler and then put him into a box, essentially standing for packaging your JavaScript plugins into a component that you can more easily use in your web pages. So the Bootstrap JavaScript-based components essentially take jQuery-based support, but then package them in a way that you can employ them in your web page even without writing a single line of JavaScript code. This is where the Bootstrap JavaScript component can be used without writing a single line of code. The way it is supported in Bootstrap is that the JavaScript components support a number of data -star attributes that you can apply to your HTML tags. So you will see me using things like data toggle, data spy, data target, and so on. If you recall, when we designed the nav bar, you had actually seen a couple of these attributes where we designed the button for the extra small screens. Now it is time for us to learn why we did that in the previous module. So we will explore this approach in great detail in this module, looking at several Bootstrap components that leverage JavaScript support. Of course, you can leverage the full JavaScript API that is available for all these components by actually writing JavaScript code. We will defer this to the next module where we will examine how you can write simple JavaScript code based upon the jQuery syntax to add more functionality to your JavaScript-based Bootstrap components.